Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today, I'm looking at a video by the CMI video channel. Creation Ministries International, or CMI, is the organization that gave Calvin of Answers in Genesis Canada his start back in the day, and it's always interesting to check in and see what they're up to. I decided not to cover their most recent atrocity, in which they attempt to demonize abortion and have to do so by resorting to hyperbolic language, half-truths, and outright lies. I may have covered that one on Twit tweets. I haven't decided as of this writing yet whether or not that's something I want to do, but if I did, I'll leave a card to that video here. If I did not, you won't see it here. Anyway, this one is called Noah's Ark, Fact or Fiction? A question to which the obvious answer is fiction, because as it turns out, Noah's Ark is so obviously impossible that even creationists writing in creationist journals have to suggest that God changed the laws of physics to make it work. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's see how they answer the question.
Genesis 6-8 tells of how God judged the earth with a global flood. Noah was to build an ark and take his family and a selection of animals on board to survive this watery judgment.
Yes, in a story that couldn't be more obviously mythological in nature if it featured a talking snake.
Right. But everyone has questions about the details. Ark construction, number of animals, caring for them, food, water. There are dozens of questions. And no surprise here, without answers, some people end up thinking it couldn't be real.
Right.
Even with your answers, people figure it can't be real. Because it literally cannot, even according to creationist geologists who think that it is real, as I alluded to in the intro. From John Baumgartner's paper published in Creation Research Society Quarterly, it is the author's suspicion that God modified some single fundamental aspect of the natural order, which in turn affected all the fundamental forces, including the gravitational force, the electrostatic force, and the nuclear forces, in a manner that did not fatally disrupt the delicate balances that exist in living systems, and whose signature in the astronomical data may be subtle. The author believes that the sooner the community of scientists who are aware of the integrity of the Bible is convinced the system of natural law that normally describes the orderly behavior of the cosmos cannot have been time invariant, the sooner genuine progress will be made in establishing the framework that accounts for Noah's flood and the geological history of our planet in a robust and satisfying way. To paraphrase, the sooner creationists accept the fact that the flood was physically impossible, the sooner they can figure out how God messed with physics to make it possible. Or, to make it even more concise, why are you all so dead set on finding a scientific explanation for magic?
Scientifically, the flood provides the mechanism for rapid geological activity. Without it, it would be very difficult to believe in a recent creation. If the flood was not responsible for thick layers of rock full of fossils all over the world, then millions of years is really the only game in town.
Well, that's quite the telling admission. I'm glad to know that you recognize that geology obviously supports an old Earth if we don't start with the young Earth creationist assumption and use the flood as an excuse anytime something doesn't work for the young Earth viewpoint.
So 300 cubits would be about 450 feet, or 140 meters. That's 1.5 football fields.
Wow.
It was also 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, and had 3 decks. That's a lot of space.
Woodmore estimated the total storage volume to be about 43,200 cubic meters.
Okay, so there we go. The Ark was significantly smaller than the Titanic, a boat that held a maximum of just over 3,500 people. And according to the Ark Encounter website, there would have been 6,744 animals on the Ark. Now, sure, there was a bunch of wasted space on the Titanic from a trying to cram as many people as will physically fit perspective, giving it a spacious average of 208 square feet per person. But for the Ark and its 3 decks, using the Answers in Genesis number, it's 15 square feet per animal, not including storage space for food and fresh water or aisles to walk in. If we're making stalls for the animals, that would be a 4 foot by 4 foot stall per animal. For reference, 10 by 10 is the smallest recommended stall size for a horse. Granted, not all animals need that much room, but there are many that would require more than that. And fun fact, I looked into sheep pens as well, which are supposed to be about 15 square feet per animal at an absolute minimum, but right after the section on floor space was a section on ventilation, stating that improperly vented barns are the perfect breeding grounds for viruses and bacteria that can cause respiratory disease in many animals, making it imperative to keep the air clear from excess humidity and heavy odors. Something that is made exceedingly difficult for ruminants ruminants, that's animals that chew their cud, because some of the byproducts of their digestive process are water and heat, meaning that when in an enclosed space such as a barn, or a tightly packed boat full of animals, their digestion will naturally lead to conditions that are conducive to the spread of diseases that are deadly to them. The recommendation to prevent these conditions is ventilation, using things that Noah would not have had access to, like giant fans. According to the biblical description of the ark, there was only one window in the whole thing, making proper ventilation impossible at best. And usually I would follow that up with an at worst scenario, but when your best case scenario is impossible, the best and worst case scenarios are literally the same. So yeah, it was impossible. And that's even just from a disease spreading perspective. From a you can't survive an environment where the atmosphere is mostly methane, carbon dioxide, and other trace toxic gases from animal farts, it gets even worse. And did I mention how ridiculously low the 6,744 animals number is? If that was the entire world population of animals right after the flood, plus 8 humans, then in order to get to the diversity of species that we see today, evolution would have to happen at a much more rapid pace than any evolutionary biologist today would accept, much less an evolution-denying creationist. In order to go from the just over 3,300 species of animals on the Ark, that's 6,700 individual animals divided by 2, to the approximately 5.8 million species of terrestrial animals that exist today, there would need to be nearly 4 new species evolving every single day over that 4,000-year period. Why do we not see such rapid speciation today if that bottleneck actually existed? Speaking of bottlenecks, we can detect those by analyzing an animal's genome. To give an oversimplified explanation, a bottleneck event will severely decrease allelic diversity, that is, the total number of variations of a given allele. For example, the different versions of genes responsible for eye color are different alleles, and the more versions resulting in more potential eye colors that exist in a population are the allelic diversity of that particular allele. And if you'll think back to high school biology with me, recall that we get 2 alleles per gene, one from each parent, and the expression of that gene can be determined by the combination that is received from the parents. And just to reiterate, I am engaging in an almost criminal oversimplification here. I do know that there's a lot more to it than that. So anyway, how do we know that there were more variations of that gene in the past? By comparing the expected heterozygosity of a species with its actual heterozygosity. A gene is heterozygous when the 2 alleles of that gene in an organism are different, and homozygous when they are the same. And when there's a bottleneck event, the total number of alleles in the population will sharply decrease, but the heterozygosity will remain fairly high, resulting in a larger observed heterozygosity for a gene than would be expected given the total number of alleles for that gene in the population. Analyzing the genome in this way can tell us not only that there was a bottleneck event, but can also tell us how recent that bottleneck event was. For instance, in humans, we see evidence of a bottleneck event in non-African populations occurring about 50,000 years ago, which coincides with when the archaeological evidence suggests that we began leaving Africa, and another bottleneck event for indigenous American populations coinciding with the time when their ancestors would have been crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia to North America. Given the easy detectability of bottleneck events when analyzing a species' genome, you'd expect that all species would show evidence of a severe bottleneck occurring about 4,000 years ago. And yet, that is not the case. Anyway, I feel like I'm pre-debunking some of their upcoming arguments, so let's just get back to the video.
There were a lot of animals on board, but which ones and how many? There are millions of different species in the world today, including 1 million species of insects alone. Skeptics love to point this out, thinking that it's a knockout punch to the feasibility of the Ark.
Well, it is, but even ignoring the whole would they fit discussion, it brings us to the post-flood hyperevolution problem. When you solve the too many species to fit on the Ark problem by appealing to created kinds, as you're undoubtedly about to do, you necessarily have to believe in much more drastic evolution than any of those that you would call an evolutionist in order to account for how many species there are today. Such rapid evolution has never been observed, which is extra funny given the creationists' claim that evolution itself has never been observed. Like, firstly, yes it has, but secondly, in order for created kinds to rescue the Ark story, you would expect it to be observed to a much greater degree than it actually is. So claiming that it has never been observed kinda hurts your case.
But wait, who said anything about species? The Bible refers to kinds.
Yep, there it is. The problem here, aside from the many problems that I've already brought up regarding kinds, is that the word kind is completely without a coherent definition. Creationists engage in what they call bareminology, the study of created kinds, to try and figure out a working definition, but there is no definition that will actually fit with what we observe in nature. To clarify, a simple definition of kind would be a group of organisms that are all descended from the same ancestor, with that ancestor having been created directly by God, leaving it completely unrelated to any other organisms. But such a definition is functionally useless if we cannot isolate these groups, and as it turns out, we cannot. In fact, in bareminology, they've created a term to excuse the arbitrary separation of groups that are, in reality, related, the apoberemin. So humans clearly share characteristics with the other apes, but creationists can't accept the fact that humans not only share a common ancestor with apes, but are in fact apes themselves, so when talking about these characteristics, they'll be sure to place humans and the other apes in a separate category and talk about them being apoberemins, without really explaining why other than to appeal to the idea that God created man in his image. Also, the Bible says that bats are birds, and yeah, there are linguistic reasons why I don't generally use that as an example of the Bible getting science wrong, but come on. The all-knowing creator of the universe didn't think to make it clear for future audiences that would understand that distinction, that bats are not, in fact, birds? You'd expect an omniscient being to do better than that. Now, I'm skipping ahead a bit as he just takes his time reading Genesis 7:14 through 15, where it lists all the things that go into the ark according to their kind. But I'm going to come in for the last bit because that brings up an interesting question.
They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life.
So there you go. 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life were on the ark with Noah. This verse is usually used to explain why Noah didn't have fish on the ark. They don't breathe air, so they don't qualify. God must have somehow miraculously kept fishies alive throughout the whole ordeal in some other way. But what about cetaceans? They breathe air and are made of flesh. Did Noah take them on the ark? Was there an aquarium wing of the ark where he kept the air-breathing sea creatures like cetaceans and lungfish? And are all the cetaceans the same kind, or did he need separate tanks for the whales, manatees, and dolphins? And actually, in trying to figure out whether creationists consider all cetaceans to be the same created kind, I found that it gets even worse. Dr. Brian Thomas, writing for the Institute for Creation Research, stated that baleen whales are a different kind than toothed whales. So regardless of their relation to manatees and dolphins, Noah had to have at least 2 whale pairs on the ark. And the smallest of the baleen whales are about 2.5 to 3.5 meters long, or 8 to 11 feet, at birth, and cannot be separated from their mother until they are done nursing after 4 to 6 months. I can't find a number for how big they are at that point, but a baby mammal's most rapid period of growth is while they are still nursing, so suffice it to say that the smallest whale that Noah could take on the ark would be significantly bigger than that. And it needs an appropriately sized tank to hold it. So it was Noah's Zoo and SeaWorld, I guess.
Also, according to Genesis 7:22, the flood wiped out all land animals that breathed through nostrils, except those on the ark.
Right, and this is the verse that creationists will use to claim that whales didn't need to be on the ark, because God only wiped out everything on dry land that breathes through nostrils, thus also eliminating any land creatures that don't breathe through nostrils from having been on the ark, because, burrowing insects like termites could obviously survive for a year on floating vegetation mats with no soil to speak of, not to mention earthworms. They love floating vegetation mats, right? And that's actually their proposition for how things without nostrils would have survived the flood in a bit that I skipped earlier. But here's the thing. The nostrils caveat is only listed in the things that God killed. When listing creatures that are taken on the ark, it merely says all flesh in which there was the breath of life, a category that would include whales and insects, as it does not limit it to land-based life, nor does it limit it to animals that breathe through their nostrils. This is pedantic to be sure, but surely the all-powerful God of creation can write a book that is capable of overcoming some petty basic pedantry, right? You would think, but apparently not.
The term kind in Scripture more likely refers to larger groupings like genera or families. So not 2 of every species of dog, just 2 of the canine kind with enough genetic information to allow for the variations within the canine kind we see today.
Well, then good to know that Noah didn't need to have any apes on board, as humans are in the same family as the rest of the great apes, the hominidae. So I guess that means that chimps are directly descended from humans? Who knew? Creation science is fun! But that's likely why he said families or genera, as that way he can wiggle out of the fact that humans are related to the other great apes by saying that, in this case, kind refers to family, and we're in our own family, Homo. Now, ignoring the fact that creationists can't even figure out where to draw the line between members of the Homo family and the non-Homo ancestors of the Homo family, which they would categorize as being in the ape baramin rather than the human one, so not related even though we are descended from them. But ignoring that just leaves us with a term whose definition can change on a whim, making any separation of categories by creationists completely unfalsifiable, because once it's conclusively demonstrated that two organisms that they don't think should be related are in fact related, they can just jump up to the next taxonomic level and say, well, in this case, the word kind is referring to that level, not the one that you just used. Such flexibility with terminology is frowned upon in science, because that leaves us with an unacceptable degree of imprecision.
That means about 2,000 to 8,000 kinds on board, so about 16,000 animals, most of which were quite small.
Right.
Median size would have been about the size of a rat, with only 11% of the animals being larger than the sheep.
Right.
Funny how you use the median size rather than the average size. That would mean that 50% of the animals were larger than a rat, and that leads me to believe that the average size is significantly larger than that. And if 11% are larger than sheep, then with your 16,000 animals number, that's 1,760 animals that need a pen of at least 15 square feet and need sophisticated ventilation systems to keep them healthy. So that's 11% of the animals taking up 26% of the overall square footage of the Ark. Realistically, a lot more than that, as in the creationist worldview, larger than a sheep includes things that aren't just a little bit bigger, but are significantly bigger, like sauropod dinosaurs. Not to mention the elephants, horses, giraffes, and all the other large mammals. And of course, let's not forget about the food and water for them. Let's just assume that the average animal on the Ark was sheep-sized, as that's a claim that I've heard before, and their use of median is suspicious to say the least. The average sheep is about 87.5 kilograms, eats 2 to 3% of its body weight per day, so about 2.2 kilograms, and drinks about 6 liters of water per day. And 1 liter of water weighs 1 kilogram, so that makes that part easy. This means that if these numbers are approximately proportionate to the rest of the animals on the Ark, Noah needs to have packed 48,000 tons of just food and water for the animals, which doesn't include the weight of the animals themselves. For comparison, since they brought up the Titanic earlier, it had a maximum carrying capacity of about 46,000 tons. By square footage, the Titanic and its 9 decks was about 625% bigger than the Ark with its 3 decks. So a ship with 625% more floor space was capable of carrying 2,000 fewer tons of cargo than the smaller one, according to these numbers.
But what about the 7 pairs of clean animals? Since Moses wrote Genesis, this could refer to ceremonially clean animals under Mosaic law.
Right.
But there weren't enough of those to make a significant difference in numbers.
No, I suppose there weren't enough to make a significant difference in the overall numbers. However, this does bring to light an explicit contradiction between the different verses in the story. Genesis 6:19-20 says, "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive." Genesis 7:2-3, however, says, "Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive in the face of all the earth." So in chapter 6, we're bringing 2 of everything, and in chapter 7, we're bringing 2 of everything except birds and clean animals, and of those, we are bringing 14 each. And actually, I know I agreed earlier that this doesn't make a significant difference to the numbers, but if we're talking about 16,000 animals on the Ark, if we're taking 2 of every kind, then according to the creationist number of 196 bird kinds, that's 392 individual birds. But if we're bringing 7 pairs of each kind of bird, that brings us up to 2,744 individual birds, meaning that birds made up 17% of all the animals on the Ark. Given that there are likely fewer than 10,000 species of bird alive today, that means that 17% of the animal population of the Ark was reserved for animals that wound up making about 0.17% of the terrestrial species on the planet. Seems a tad inefficient, if you ask me. And that's using the estimate of 16,000 animals on the Ark. If we go back to the 6,744 number, then birds made up 40% of the population of the Ark. But back to the contradiction, in chapter 6, it explicitly states that we're bringing 2 of every bird. In Genesis 7, it explicitly states that we're bringing 7 pairs of every bird. So are we to believe that God was incapable of keeping his own story straight between paragraphs?
Now for some math. Putting all 16,000 animals in cages, which would average 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters by 30 centimeters would require 1,200 cubic meters of space.
Okay, but here we're coming back to your sneaky use of median instead of average when talking about animal size. But now you're switching it out and are talking about average when talking about how much room they'd require. Those are not the same measurement. You need to stay consistent here. And now that I've looked a bit more into it, as I suspected, there's a reason for this. The book that they are basing most of this video on is John Woodmorappy's book, Noah's Ark: A Feasibility Study. And Woodmorappy engaged in the same shenanigans regarding the word median that these guys are doing. But he also, for some reason, provided a total weight for all the animals, and that was 5,464,000 kilograms. With 16,000 animals on board, that gives us an average animal weight of 341 kilograms. That's significantly bigger than the 87.5 kilograms that I estimated earlier, and makes your use of a rat-sized animal just completely laughable.
Wesley, what about the ROUSs?
Rodents of unusual size? I don't think they exist.
And my low estimate of 87.5 kilograms already put us over the weight limit of the Titanic. This just makes it worse.
Besides the animals on Noah's Ark, there had to have been enough food and water to last about a year. That's a lot of kibble.
Yeah, that's right. Let's assume it was regular food as opposed to something miraculously provided like manna.
In other words, Noah needed large quantities of a wide variety of food, both plants and meat, to satisfy the dietary requirements of the diverse animals on board, which would have included living eucalyptus trees, since koalas can't figure out that leaves from said trees are food unless they're attached to a living tree, and a bunch of bamboo for the pandas, enough apple snails for the snail kites, enough fermented burtum palm nectar for the pen-tailed tree shrews, and so on.
What would all those animals eat? Skeptics point out that some animals eat mostly fruit in the wild, so how would that last a whole year? But actually most mammals kept in captivity can be sustained on the same sort of dried foods used to feed domestic livestock and pets.
So Noah packed a bunch of modern animal kibble? You know, the stuff that wasn't invented until 1956 and took modern manufacturing equipment capable of cooking the ingredients under extreme pressures and temperatures in order to make it shelf stable? You're saying that that's what Noah did, and you're claiming that that would not be miraculous?
When you go on a trip, you probably pack fairly light.
Right.
If you take food, it's likely things with concentrated nutritional value that take up less space, like protein bars.
Right.
Noah could have taken concentrated foods along with compressed and dried foodstuffs.
What machinery did the 600-year-old man who lived 4,000 years ago use to compress food? Yeah, drying food would have been helpful, but you know what? Hey, let's grant this point. God gave Noah access to miraculous technology that would allow him to cook and compress all the food he took into something the size of dog kibble, and it would provide all the nutrients for all the animals, and not even the koalas would snub it. Earlier in the video, they gave us the storage volume of the Ark.
Woodmorappy estimated the total storage volume to be about 43,200 cubic meters.
The dog kibble in my kitchen right now weighs 3.6 kilograms, and when you squish all the air out of the bag and measure just what the kibble is, it's 18 centimeters by 11 centimeters by 20 centimeters, giving it a volume of 0.00396 square meters. Earlier when I calculated the weight of the food and water that would be needed, I didn't separate the numbers, I just gave the total. For food, it was 13,000 tons, and for water, it was 35,520 tons. In order to get the 13,000 tons of food, you'd need 3.6 million bags of kibble, which would take up 14,300 cubic meters. Now, keep in mind, I did this calculation based on an average animal size that was nearly 1/4 the average animal size that we get when using Woodmorappy's numbers, so this is likely incredibly conservative. So then we have the water, which is super easy to calculate, thank you very much metric system, since 1 cubic meter of water weighs 1 ton. So for 35,520 tons of water, it would take up 35,520 cubic meters of space. 14,300 cubic meters for food and 35,520 cubic meters for water adds up to 49,820 cubic meters. They told us that the Ark had a storage volume of 43,200 cubic meters. So it looks like even if we use creationist numbers, even if we assume that the Ark was big enough to fit all the animals, it was not big enough to hold just the food and water for them. And that's also ignoring the fact that a significant percentage of an animal's water intake comes from their food. So if you dry their food, you have to take more water to make up for that. And hey, let's be extra generous and say that Noah somehow funneled the rainwater down to the animals for the first 40 days of the flood while it was raining. So instead of needing a 370-day supply of water, using the numbers from Answers in Genesis for how long the flood lasted, he only needed 330 days worth of water. That still leaves us with 31,680 cubic meters of water and a total of 45,980 cubic meters of stored food and water, which is still bigger than the 43,300 cubic meters of space on the Ark.
Back to the feasibility study for more calculations. Assuming the food was about 80% dry by mass, the total mass needed would have been 2,500 tons. If it was 90% dry, only 2,200 tons.
Bullshit. Modern kibble, dried using industrial equipment, is 90 to 95% dry, and using numbers that were accidentally way more conservative for average animal body weight than Woodmorapee used, I wound up with an order of magnitude more food required. Now, sure, I didn't account for the fact that you need a smaller mass of food when it's more dense, but given that you still need to get that water into your body from somewhere, I feel like that's a fairly minor quibble at best. Man cannot live on dry bread alone, after all.
I don't want dry bread. I'm sorry.
God could have caused all the animals to hibernate for a year, but he didn't need to. Of course, any amount of dormancy during the flood would mean even less food needed.
So, God could have magicked all the animals to sleep, but he didn't because he didn't need to, but maybe he did for some of them. Make up your minds, guys.
What about water? Perhaps Noah could have collected rainwater, but assuming he didn't, the amount of water needed on the ark for that year-long sojourn would have been about 4.07 megaliters, or a little less than 900,000 gallons.
Right.
Again, that sounds like a lot, but it only amounts to 9.4% of the ark's total volume.
So, they never actually justify this number. I feel like I might need to actually get that book and figure out the justification for these numbers myself at some point, but they just flat out assert it. I used the amount of water that a sheep drinks per day and assumed that it scaled with body mass, an assumption that does not necessarily hold true, but when talking about this magnitude of animals, it won't make a huge difference. The ones that drink more water per kilogram of body weight will make up for those that drink less. So that's my justification for my number. Why do you think that 16,000 animals would require an order of magnitude less water than the number that I gave? Especially since you're saving space on the Ark by assuming that Noah packed all dried food, which is 80 to 90% dry, thus increasing the actual water requirements of the animals. The numbers don't even work out for you. I reran the calculation with rat numbers. The average rat drinks about 10 milliliters of water per 100 grams of body mass per day, with the average rat being about 300 grams. That would leave us with only 158 tons of water on the Ark total, taking 158 cubic meters of space. So your numbers are just wildly off, no matter how we look at it. And in an effort to figure out where those numbers even came from, I started looking at reviews of Woodmorapee's book, and apparently the lack of justification is not unique to these two. Woodmorapee himself would frequently just plop numbers down as though they were accurate, with zero justification and zero citation, including his number for how much water was required. He also can't seem to manage to stay consistent. When talking about the body mass of animals on the Ark, he says that there are 24 categories of animals, 8 weight divisions for each of 3 classes of animals, the reptiles, birds, and mammals. Then, when calculating food requirements, for no apparent reason, he now gives us 32 categories of animals, and then when calculating water, there are 27 categories. He also does things like claim that snails and earthworms are on the Ark as a food source and as a means of breaking down solid waste, respectively, but then goes on to respond to problems raised by Glenn Morton, an old Earth creationist, about snails and earthworms on the Ark by saying, after raising some transparently absurd problems of snails and earthworms, animals not on the Ark, migrating to the Ark, Morton then dusts off the old chestnut about the slow-moving sloth needing practically forever to reach the Ark from South America. So in one part of his book, earthworms and snails were on the Ark, not to preserve them but to be food and waste processors, but then in another part of his book, there's no problem with how they got to the Ark because they weren't on the Ark. And this is the book that they decided to base this whole ass video on.
So Noah and his family had about 73% of the Ark to wander around in, or to run laps for that matter.
Well, not quite. What about all the other stuff that results from eating all that eating? No flush toilets, after all.
That's right, yeah.
So I guess rather than going the AIG route and having Noah invent a complicated elevator system for waste removal, they just store all the shit on the Ark? That must have been pleasant. Oh yeah. Also, I don't know if they're going to mention this, but Woodmorapee's book literally makes the claim that Noah spent a bunch of his pre-flood time training the 16,000 animals to all poop and pee on command so that they could do so in buckets as the humans come by, thus saving a bunch of time in unnecessary stall cleanup. Never mind that there's a huge chunk of animals that cannot be trained in such a manner, or the time it would have taken Noah to train those animals beforehand. Like, for dogs, it takes about a month of consistently giving a verbal command every time they pee or poop for them to be able to make the connection and begin doing it on command. And dogs are specially bred to be trainable. But the creationist story is that Noah took the basal kind on the ark, so it would have been something more like a wild wolf than a domestic dog. They are much less inclined to accept training. But still, assuming 1 month of training time per animal, and that he could train 10 animals at the same time, remember he needs to be watching them constantly so he can consistently give them the associated command every time they do their business, so 10 is actually probably a bit much. That means that he had to spend about 133 years training these animals before beginning construction on the ark. There is no mention in the Bible of Noah having one of the largest zoos in human history in the years leading up to the flood. That seems like a pretty glaring omission on God's part. Anyway, let's see what these dingbats actually say about what must have been the shittiest sea voyage in history.
Believe it or not, Woodmoraphy calculated that too.
He did.
Given the size and number of animals, along with the type of food and estimated moisture content, he calculated the total volume of excrement to be about 12 cubic meters per day, or about 4,400 cubic meters total for the year.
That is one big pile of shit.
Of course, as manure increases, the food and water volume decreases. Right. But where would it all go? Most modern-day barns have automated systems in place to remove the nasty stuff with relatively little human labor. The ark could have had a system like that, not conveyor belts, but rather slatted cage floors with another sloped floor underneath, allowing the waste to empty into a gutter or a pit below, as shown here.
Okay, so you are going with the AIG version of waste removal, where Noah invented farming technologies that were immediately lost upon the end of his story, not to be reinvented again until the modern age. Well, I mean, I guess that gravity-fed system isn't quite as egregious as their shit-flinging tower idea, but I feel like this would result in a layer of piss accumulating on the bottom floor of the ark in fairly short order. Seems unsanitary to say the least, but at least y'all seem to recognize the ridiculousness of Woodmoraphy's assertion that the animals were trained to shit on command into buckets. Would have been nice if you applied the same skepticism to the rest of the claims in his book, but here we are.
This would make cleanup fairly easy.
Yeah, that's right.
Even without vermicomposting or dumping anything overboard, we've already shown there was plenty of room for it all.
And while doing that, you've ignored the accumulation of gases like carbon dioxide, which are heavier than air and would settle in the ark, displacing the breathable air and suffocating the animals from the bottom up. Worse than carbon dioxide, though, is hydrogen sulfide, a gas that is also heavier than air, so would not be adequately ventilated by the single window at the top of the ark, and which will cause unconsciousness and death when present in concentrations as low as 500 parts per million, which is a level that can easily be reached in modern manure pits with modern ventilation systems, requiring workers in such conditions to have personal hydrogen sulfide detectors attached to their collars at all times as a minimum precaution, with the best recommendation being a self-contained breathing apparatus, as a single breath at that concentration can be fatal. Hell, even methane, which is lighter than air, can sometimes accumulate in modern barns to a level that can result in an explosion, destroying the barn and killing the livestock. With one single vent at the top of the ship, I don't see how Noah's Ark could do a better job ventilating methane than modern barns. And this is just the problem of gases that are the result of animal digestion and the composting or decomposition of manure. Just storing plant material can also result in dangerous gases, like nitrogen dioxide, another heavier than air gas that will build up in silos storing plant material very rapidly, and which can cause sudden death even after very short exposure. Noah's Ark is an OSHA nightmare.
Another possibility is very deep bedding, which can last for up to a year without being needed to be changed.
Right.
Pet stores, please take note. Do not let this guy buy guinea pigs, hamsters, gerbils, or anything else from you. He will not take proper care of them. Giving an animal thicker bedding does not mean you don't have to clean it for up to a year. It means the animal will be living in its own filth on the top layer for the majority of that time.
And a single continuous slotted window at the top of the ark would provide adequate ventilation for both odor and body heat.
Right.
Yeah, I doubt very much that the window at the top of the boat would provide adequate ventilation for all 3 decks of the Ark, especially considering the hazardous gases that are heavier than air. And this is actually one of the times when Woodmoraphy actually did show his work and told us how he calculated that the window would be adequate to ventilate the whole Ark. He took a wild guess at the average wind speed and multiplied that by the window's surface area, assuming that the window went all the way around the Ark, which is not at all made clear by the biblical text, and showed that enough air moved through that window to successfully exchange all the air on the Ark frequently enough to keep its denizens alive. But that's not how fluid flow calculations work. Anyone who is sheltered from the wind by standing around a corner of a building can tell you that solid objects don't allow the free flow of air, and Woodmoraphy is silent on the matter of how the air from the bottom deck made its way up to the window, especially given the accumulation of heavier-than-air toxic gases that would have been occurring down there.
But how could 8 people feed 16,000 animals? Visit a large beef or pig farm and you'll see that just a few people can feed a lot of animals rather efficiently.
Alright, for argument's sake, let's go with that. Again, we're assuming that modern industrial farming methods were available to a guy who supposedly existed before our scientific knowledge reached the level of air as an actual physical thing. In the United States currently, that's 2023 if you're watching this in the future, there are 785,208 employees who work in beef cattle production, and there are about 28.9 million beef cattle. So that's about 36 animals per employee. At that ratio, Noah and his family would be able to care for a total of 294 animals if they used modern farming methods. But hey, not all beef cattle production employees care for the animals. Some are doing things like accounting. So let's be generous and cut the number of employees in half. That leaves us with 73 cattle to every employee, bringing Noah's total ability to care for animals up to 588. Okay, fine. Let's say only 10% of the employees actually care for the animals. All of the rest are administration, slaughtering, butchering, and whatever else might be involved. That gives us 368 cattle per employee, which brings Noah's total capacity up to almost 3,000 animals. So Noah and his family only need to be 5 times more efficient than modern industrial farms when it comes to feeding and cleaning up after their animals, and that is by very generously assuming that only 10% of the employees in the beef industry actually have anything to do with caring for the cattle.
One option is to keep the food in compartments directly above the cages. This saves both floor space and time because there's less walking involved. They also could have used self-feeders like troughs designed to hold enough food for several days at a time. These could be lined up on one side of a row of cages with the manure gutter on the other side, maybe down the middle between 2 rows.
Water could have been poured into a second set of long drinking troughs, possibly above the feeding troughs.
Yeah.
You know what? Creationists keep giving all these "this is how maybe it could have been done" scenarios. I'd like to see one of them actually build something like that and see how many people it takes to care for the animals situated in such a setup. Because I very much doubt that such systems will be 5 times more efficient than modern industrial farming. Actually, scratch that. I would not like to see that because that would be needlessly cruel to the animals involved. But it's still quite telling that of all the Ark replicas that have been attempted and sometimes even completed over the years, not a single one has actually demonstrated the possibility of actually caring for the animals in the manner that they suggest. Okay, this one's getting long, so I'm just going to give a brief summary of the remaining points that they bring up and then respond to them quickly here. You can accuse me of strawmanning if you want, but you can also go watch the original video, the link is in the description, in order to see whether or not I am fairly representing them. Okay, they claim that the fish would have been fine because some aquatic species can survive changes in salinity. But some species being able to survive such a change does not mean that all species can, and indeed we know of plenty that cannot. Also, apparently there were pockets of fresh water in the flood that somehow didn't get mixed into the rest of the water, and those pockets lasted for the whole 370 days because, turbulence wouldn't stir it up at all? I don't even feel the need to respond to that, it's so ridiculous. Anyway, they then claim that 95% of fossils we have found are marine creatures, so obviously that means a global flood. Never mind the fact that marine environments are also the ones that are most conducive to the fossilization process, leaving us with a bias toward marine organisms in the fossil record even without a global flood. So even if that number is accurate, it means nothing. Then they say that plants survived by having their seeds preserved either in the ark or in the stomachs of floating carcasses. No mention of how they grew in the now salted soil that would exist post-flood, or how a full-grown olive tree was able to show up immediately after the flood. Then they talk about the fact that wooden ships flex too much, allowing water in and causing them severe problems. The longest confirmed wooden ship was the Wyoming, which was 15 meters shorter than the Ark, and even with iron cross bracing, it required pumps to remove all the water from below decks that entered as a result of all the wooden planks flexing. But their go-to example is a ship that was supposedly built in 200 BCE, as it was described by James Ussher in 1650. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he's the guy that came up with the biblical chronology that creationists largely use today to say that the Earth is 6,000 years old, so not exactly what I would consider an overly trustworthy source. But even so, his description led AIG to claim that the ship was 120 meters long, so that's 35 meters shorter than the Ark. So yeah, the longest confirmed wooden ship had iron bracing and still suffered from flexing that made it barely seaworthy, and the other ships that they bring up are significantly shorter than the Ark. They then claim that the Ark would have been able to tilt as much as 60 degrees and survive big waves while still being able to right itself, which I feel like came from that one study that I covered a while ago where they assumed that Noah used modern shipbuilding techniques and applied those techniques to the Ark in order to get numbers that they liked. But that aside, you guys said that Noah kept all the shit on board the Ark, and agitating the shit container was very heavily warned against in the document talking about all the toxic gases that result from manure, as agitation drastically increases their release. So by claiming that the Ark was enduring these conditions, you are also killing off the inhabitants of the Ark as their massive ship pile is agitated to where it will produce plenty of deadly toxic gases in short order. Also, it's quite telling that in all these defenses of Noah's Ark, they have to appeal to modern shipbuilding techniques, modern farming techniques, modern breeding techniques, and basically everything modern that didn't exist back when Noah was doing his stuff. Make of that what you will. Then they claim that the predators did not immediately kill the prey animals by suggesting that they disembarked at different times, giving the prey a head start, with the predators feeding on the corpses of the animals that died in the flood and had been floating and rotting for a year. Getting around the disease-ridden rotten corpses aspect by claiming that buried corpses turned into a bacteria-free jelly for the predators to dig up, and I guess this jelly would somehow last long enough for the prey animals to sufficiently reproduce to be huntable again. The herbivores would, of course, live off of seaweed. Never mind the specialized diets, every herbivore in existence can live off an exclusively seaweed diet, obviously. And then they point out that sometimes breeding populations can be established from a single breeding pair, which is true in some cases, but then they make the absurd claim that this would necessarily lead to rapid population growth, which would then contribute to a correspondingly rapid increase in genetic diversity, which is just not how that works. After a severe bottleneck event, the genetic diversity is significantly lowered for an extended period of time, and the reason that a single pair is generally thought to not be enough for a healthy breeding population is because this lack of diversity will make it more likely that even a slight environmental change would wipe the species out as it's unable to adapt. And you want these single breeding pairs to not only survive the flood, but also survive their migration back to their habitats after the flood, enduring untold hardships along the way? That's just not practical. I mean, sure, God could have protected them or whatever, but if you're going to invoke magic at this point, why bother trying to make the Ark sound feasible in the first place? Why not just start with, yeah, we know it's impossible, that's why it's a miracle? Then they point out that new species evolve rapidly sometimes, giving examples of new species evolving in 500, 200, and as little as 4 years, as though that would somehow account for the 4 new species per day since the flood that would be required. And then they follow that up by saying that that's not evolution, because reasons. And then finally they counter the claim that landing on Mount Ararat was a bad idea because it was a volcano. Which, I mean, fine, I guess, who cares? I've never even heard that one. Where the Ark landed is literally the least of the problems with the story. So that's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Objective Reality 908, who says, "Read the entire passage!" This was on one of my Fucked Up Bible Passages shorts, where I read 1 Samuel 15:3, where God commands Saul to kill all the Amalekites and their livestock, even going so far as to specify children and infants in those that are to be killed. Reading the whole passage does not make this one better. The fact that Saul let one Amalekite, the king, and some of their animals live was the reason that God gave for replacing Saul with King David. He regretted making Saul king because Saul wasn't genocidal enough. So, yeah, maybe in the future read the entire passage for yourself before complaining about other people taking things out of context? Thanks for watching. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole, and I stream with my partner every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern here. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorships manager, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the decomposing corpse jelly that feeds the carnivore that is my channel. If you'd like to somehow be more appealing to eat than fresh meat, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!